So Jonathan Martinis, who is joining us via Zoom, is the Senior Director for Law and Policy at the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. He is based at BBI's Washington, D.C. office and leads the Institute's national and international efforts. Martinis has over 20 years of experience representing and advocating for people with disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. He served as lead counsel in Bryn versus Tidewater Transportation District Commission, the first case to hold that people with disabilities have a right to paratransit transportation on a next-day basis. He was also lead counsel in Winbor v. Virginia Lottery, in which the court held that the lottery must ensure that all private businesses selling lottery tickets are accessible to people with disabilities. Most notably, in 2013, Martinis represented Jenny Hatch in the nationally acclaimed Justice for Jenny case. Martinis helped Ms. Hatch secure her right to live where and how she wants to live, make her own decisions, and direct her life. Jenny's case was the first trial to hold that a person with disabilities has a right to engage in supported decision-making, where people work with trusted friends, family members, and professionals to help them understand the situations and choices they face so that they make their own decisions rather than be subjected to an unnecessary permanent plenary or full guardianship. So Jonathan, welcome to you, sir. And Bradley. Bradley Meurrens is the Public Policy Director at Disability Rights Nebraska. Brad holds a bachelor's degree in Latin from, that is so wonderful, from the University of Nebraska, and a master's degree in public administration from Maxwell School at Syracuse University. After a short time working as a public policy consultant in McLean, Virginia, Brad returned home to Nebraska, where he's worked in public policy and is the primary registered lobbyist for Disability Rights Nebraska since December of 2001. So we are in for an amazing experience. So Brad, Jonathan, thank you both. Let's give it up for them, please.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I hope we can live up to it. I know Jonathan can. I'll do my best to as well. Thank you for your time today. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. This gives us an opportunity to talk about supported decision making and talk about it in a different context. We've given a lot of presentations throughout the state and throughout the couple of years of our project so far, and we've really kind of focused our attention on persons with disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities. But this is an opportunity to present more different information, a different perspective, but we recognize that supported decision making has a wide applicability. So we're excited to branch out and to address this issue and talk to you about it from a different perspective. And so let me give you a little bit of background. So Disability Rights Nebraska a few years ago was interested in learning more about and bringing raising awareness around this supported decision-making concept. And it's usually used as an alternative to inappropriate and or overbroad guardianships, and it's also a tool by which we can use to increase the self-determination of persons with disabilities, or in this context, persons who are aging. And so we are now currently in the second year of our project. I came a couple of years ago to talk about this issue and give you a broad understanding, and we're back here to be a little bit more specific today. So we're in year 2. We're wrapping up year 2. We're also looking at a third. We've also applied for a continuation grant for fiscal year 24. So I'm going to give you a little bit about what our initiative is about. Fiscal year 23 highlights. Fiscal year 24, where we think we want to go. Give you a little bit of information, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit about and start the discussion and lay a foundation for the application of supported decision making, its concept, what it is, and how it applies to this particular community. And then I will hand it over to Jonathan for his expertise. So without further ado, I will start this here. So, supported decision making, our initiative. So again, like I said, we have initiated a multi-year initiative to raise awareness and education about the concept of supported decision-making. We have a multidisciplinary and collaborative approach. You know, we have developed a steering committee and a task force of a variety of different stakeholders to help us maintain momentum, access different sectors or disciplines like the aging community, and to help us think broadly and implement our activities. Since there is a wide application of supported decision-making for a variety of social groups and communities, we have also a diverse array of steering committee and task force members. We have folks from the aging community on our task force. We have folks from, obviously, disability community on our steering committee and task force. We have educators on our task force, education and transition individuals in those areas. So we have a very wide variety of folks to give us a wide variety of opinions. So again, our initiative is focused primarily on raising awareness and educating stakeholder organizations, families, individuals, and the public about supported decision-making and its potential benefits as an alternative to inappropriate or undue guardianships or as a supplement to an existing guardianship. And it is, again, a tool by which we can increase and raise the self-determination and authority for individuals on their own. But we're not limiting our initiative to only persons with disabilities. Again, that's why we're here today, because we recognize that it's a wide variety of applicability for a wide variety of groups. In 23, here's kind of what we're doing and what we've done. We set out probably four main goals. We wanted to present to organizations and individuals statewide to, again, educate and raise awareness about supported decision-making. That's why we're here today. We wanted to we are creating a web-based resource clearinghouse for educational materials, presentations, videos, so that individuals who want to know more but can't make it here today can log onto our website and get all the information that they need at their own leisure. We are also creating brochures and a video series to educate people about supported decision-making. Again, that will be uploaded to our web-based clearinghouse. And we want to establish educational, what we're calling ambassadors. And those are who can educate others about supported decision-making. And what's unique about these ambassadors is that these are folks that we've identified or will identify that have experience implementing supported decision-making. And they can talk to other families as a peer-to-peer. They're not listening to me talking about the study this and the study that, but they're actually talking to individuals who have walked the walk and talked the talk and done supported decision-making. We thought that would be a really good example to get some deep saturation of education for folks. In 2024, we're planning to hold a statewide summit, again, to educate people and the public about supported decision-making. We're looking at spring of 24. Secondly, we want to continue those educational presentations statewide, and we want to add another community. We want to add the legal and judicial entities like lawyers and judges, and we want to use those, and if we can get ambassadors from that community, that'd be even better. We want to continue the creation of our educational materials, those are our brochures, our videos, the web clearinghouse. But the fourth thing is the new piece for 2024, and that is the pivot to policy. We spent the first 2 years now talking to groups, educating ourselves about supported decision-making and focusing on transition students and education and other communities in the disability community. But now we want to talk about, well, how do we put this into practice? How do we implement what we've been talking about? How do we go from theory to practice? And so that's what we're going to focus on primarily in this next year. We're also going to be looking to develop a report with policy recommendations for Nebraska and how they can implement supported decision-making. Here's my contact information if you ever want to know more about supported decision-making or our project, or if you want to, see what we're doing and what we're all about. If you want to come to a meeting, if you want to participate, we'd be happy to have you. You can certainly get a hold of me. By email is the best, but certainly get a hold of me if you have any questions about our initiative. So now, are there any questions, real quick?
Looks like we have.
I know I talk kind of fast, but
No, it's okay. So, as a guardian conservator in Nebraska, this individual says they feel that the law in Nebraska is very broad, and they're always looking for additional resources for themselves. What resources, committees, websites would you recommend for this individual to refer to when advocating for their ward?
That's a very good question. I've got some resources at the end of the next set of slides that will help, and Jonathan might be able to talk to that as well. So hang on, it's coming up. So now I want to talk about supported decision making and its relevance to the aging community. I just kind of want to set a foundation and set for Jonathan then to kind of knock out of the park. So what is it? How do we define supported decision making? Well, there's no singular definition or model of supported decision making, but it generally occurs when people with disabilities, including those that are related to changes in memory or cognition, they work with families, friends, professionals, and others they trust to help them understand situations and choices that they face. They can ask questions, get explanations in language they understand, and communicate their own decisions to others. That's a lot of words. But I think it does kind of encapsulate, or at least give you an idea, a fresh sort of entry-level idea of what we're talking about here. Another way to define it, by Robert Dinnerstein, he talks about how it is a series of relationships, practices, arrangements, and agreements of more or less formality and intensity, which are designed to assist the individual to make and communicate to others decisions about the individual's life. Now, I want you to put a pin in these definitions, because I know Jonathan wants to talk about these more in particular in his set of slides. So just kind of put a pin in this. There's more to come. Supported decision making is usually contrasted with substitute or surrogate decision making, which occurs when someone else, like a guardian, is legally designated to make decisions for and instead of the individual. Under supported decision making, it is the person or with a disability or older adult who is the decision maker rather than the guardian. Applicability. Often, this concept is assumed to be for and only for people with disabilities, especially those with intellectual or developmental disabilities, but that is not true. There are unique circumstances of the aging community that present challenges to implement supported decision making. For example, an orientation towards protection over rights, isolation, dwindling support, undue influence or exploitation. We've heard about that. And skepticism about, well, is it really worthwhile if this person's dementia or their condition is going to be progressively getting worse? What do we really need to do this? But the U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging did a year-long investigation into guardianship, and they recommended in their report in 2018, and this is a hyperlink to the report, that they encourage states to promote supported decision-making among other less restrictive alternatives. See, it is applicable. Supported decision-making can be an effective alternative to overbroad, undue, or inappropriate guardianship. Now, I want to stop here for a quick second. I want you to remember those qualifying terms: overbroad, undue, or inappropriate guardianship. That is the key. It's not talking about regulating all guardianship levels, but those are the ones. But those are overbroad, undue, or inappropriate. And we can use this tool for all individuals. There's no reason to assume that the benefits of supported decision-making, i.e. self-determination, making your own choices, safeguarding your own rights, can be used for a whole host of different communities, not just the disability community. Here's an example. Dolores in D.C. Dolores is 87 years old, well, at least in 2018, and she lives in a subsidized building for seniors in D.C. In 2015, she was facing eviction because she fell behind in her rent. The landlord said, all right, fine, we'll make a deal. I will consider your payment plan only if you get a guardian to help you with your finances. So facing eviction and offered a way out, she took it. However, and here's another thing that Jonathan will talk about later, is that she agreed to the guardianship for her finances, but under DC law, when she agreed to that, the guardianship applies to a whole host of things that are above and beyond just finances. She was considered to be an incapacitated individual who was unable to manage her real and personal property, health care, and other daily affairs. And once she regained her financial stability, paid off her debt, she asked the guardian to file a letter with the court saying that she no longer needed him. He didn't do it. And so she went to court. In October of 2018, Dolores became the first older adult in D.C. to have her guardianship and conservatorship terminated in favor of supported decision-making. As Dolores said, it makes you feel powerful to be in charge of your own life. You can have a lot of help everywhere, but you are your own boss. And that's the key. It preserves, supported decision-making as a model is intended to preserve rights as much as it can and provide a tool to provide self-determination for individuals who are under guardianship or other sort of arrangements. So that's kind of here. I know here are the resources that I talked about later. The Dolores example came out of the Syracuse Law Review. A lot of the information that I had in here is from the Whitlock and Diller law reviews. And I thought those were really good. And the links here are all live. You don't have to go to Lexis to get it. You can click on the link or you can search the web. All these resources are on the web. You don't have to do any special paywall or anything like that. So I hope that gives you a little taste of what supported decision making is and how it can apply to the aging community. Are there any questions before I turn it over to Jonathan? Jonathan?
Yes.
Wait.
Oh, sorry. There's a
What would
question.
the difference be between supported decision-making and limited power of attorney, or guardianship where it's limited by a county court? In Nebraska, they have the power to do that now, and as far as I know, they routinely do that, or at least ask the questions as far as how should this guardianship be limited?
I can jump in on that one, Brad, if you
Go
want.
right ahead.
And I think as I described a bit about supported decision-making, it'll become more clear, but the really short version is this. There is little to no difference between supported decision-making and a power of attorney if you write the power of attorney to include supported decision-making. In states that do not have laws recognizing supported decision-making agreements, I strongly recommend including elements of supported decision-making in the power of attorney. I will describe that as we go along in my presentation. With regard to the difference between supported decision-making and a guardianship, the difference is vast. Because in supported decision-making, it is the person who makes the decision with support from others. In a guardianship, limited or not, it is still the guardian that makes the ultimate decision, not the person. I think there can be elements of supported decision-making in guardianship, where the guardian listens to the person and empowers that person to make as many decisions as possible, and in fact, that is a best practice. But at the end of the day, in guardianship, the guardian is the decision-maker, not the person. And I think that's a great place for me to jump in with my presentation. And what I'll say at the outset is thank you. I will begin where I'm going to end, which is thank you so much for having me here. My name is Jonathan Martinis. I am with the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. And following up with Brad, what I get to talk to you about today, and I do mean get, because I consider it a privilege to do so, is what I consider to be the greatest advances in human and civil rights for older adults and people with disabilities since the Americans with Disabilities Act. Brad gave you a very good background on supported decision-making. It falls to me to talk a little bit more to fill in some of the gaps. And the first thing I want to tell you is something I tell all of my audiences, and something Brad said as well. I want to echo it. If you've heard of supported decision-making, and as Brad discussed it, it is an alternative to guardianship, something you can do instead of a guardianship. But what you will not hear me say, what you will not hear Brad or anyone involved in our task force say, is that there should never be guardianships. That is not our point in being here today. Our point is not to say that guardianship is bad, that if you've advocated for guardianships, if you are a guardian, if you know someone in guardianship and you advocated for it, you weren't wrong, you weren't evil. What we are here to talk about are ways and things that you can consider that may be appropriate for a person, and if they are, can, according to science, make their lives better. And that's the second point I have to make. The things that I'm about to tell you about, the things that Brad did tell you about, are not aspirational. They're not hippie trippy vaporware. They're not a hope. What they are is backed by 4 decades of science. The things you are going to hear me say, and in my PowerPoint presentation, you will see citations to it, are things that have been established year after year in study after study. So when I say, and as Brad said, that supported decision-making can lead to a better life for older adults, we're not guessing. We have science behind us. And with that, let me begin. So as we talk about supported decision-making, and I'm sharing my screen, the first thing I want to tell you about is to ask you a question, is to ask you to do something that people don't often do. And that's this. I want you to think about your rights. I want you to think about your rights. I want you to think about your favorite rights. And I know it's a weird question to say, what's your favorite right, like the screen says. It sounds like a pickup line at an ACLU convention, but bear with me. Think about the rights that are important to you, that you would fight to keep, that you can't imagine not having, the ones we even take for granted. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to vote, freedom to associate, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, those bedrock rights that are part of our American Republic since the Declaration of Independence. Now think about those, and think about the ones that mean the most to you. Whether they mean freedom of speech, whether they mean the right to vote, whether they mean the right to choose where and how to live, the happiness you'll pursue, the life and liberty you'll have. What do all those rights have in common? And what they have in common is choice. Because freedom of speech is the right to choose what to say and what not to say. Freedom of association is the right to choose who to be around and who you don't want to be around. Freedom to vote is the right to choose who will govern us. These are all the bedrock parts of our rights that make our rights real. Without choice, we don't have rights. There's a quote up on your screen from the philosopher and playwright Jean-Paul Sartre. If you've read your Sartre, you know he's not the sunshiniest fellow, but he gets this one right. I am my choices. Each and every one of us is the sum total of the choices we make. The good ones, the bad ones, the silly ones, the significant ones, they add up to make us the people we are. So when you hear me ask this silly question, what's your favorite right? My favorite right is the right to make choices. Because without that one, our rights aren't real. And when you hear the right to make choices, I want you to associate that with a phrase. That phrase is self-determination. Self-determination is a scientific phrase, it's in all kinds of journals. I'm not a huge buzzword fan, but I want you to remember that one. Self-determination. Because what that means is making choices, having control over your life. People who are self-determined do things instead of having things done to them. They make choices instead of having choices made for them. They are the causal agents in their life, the captains of their ship. So when you hear people being self-determined, equate that to people making choices that impact their lives. And here's something that we know. We know from decade after decade and study after study, older adults and people with disabilities who have more self-determination have better lives. I feel comfortable saying that as a statement of fact because there are study after study finding it. Older adults and people with disabilities who are more self-determined, who make more choices, are more likely to be healthier, independent, well-adjusted, and safer. But if that's true, the corollary has to be true as well. Because if you're not allowed to make choices, if you're not allowed to exercise your rights, what good are they? Are your rights worth anything if you're not allowed to use them? If I say, oh, of course, theoretically, you have the right to speak, but you're only going to speak when I tell you to, and you're only going to say what I tell you to. Theoretically, you have the right to vote only if I take you to the polls, and then you will pull that lever, metaphorically speaking, for the candidate I tell you to. Are those rights? Without choice, our rights mean nothing. But that's exactly what we've been doing to older adults and people with disabilities for about 1,500 years. Quick confession, I'm a big legal geek. I am a lawyer, please don't hate me, but I am also a big legal geek. And I can tell you this unequivocally. The first time that a country's laws were unified in the Western legal tradition, the Eastern legal tradition had the Code of Hammurabi about 8,000 years ago, but the first time in the Western legal tradition where we got our rights from was a book called the Justinian Code. A Roman emperor named Justinian had all the governors of all the provinces get their laws together and harmonize them into one book. And it was called the Justinian Code. I am such a geek. I, one, have a copy, and two, named one of my sons Justin. So I have read the Justinian Code from 1,500 years ago. And you can absolutely say it is the first time in the Western legal tradition we had unified rights. But I can also tell you that one of the laws in the Justinian Code said this. If you were feeble-minded, and that was their word for older adults with any cognitive limitations and people with disabilities, you had to have a curator put over you, someone to make decisions for you. And that began what I call a culture, something that has followed us for the last 1,500 years, an expectation that when you have any limitations, when you decline, when you show any lesser abilities than you had before, it means you can't do things, and you have to have people do things for you. That has followed us in feudal Britain, Great Britain in the Middle Ages, where we got most of our laws. They updated Justinian. What they said is if you're an idiot or a lunatic, and that was what they called people with disabilities and older adults with cognitive impairments, you're an idiot or a lunatic, you had to have a committee over you to make decisions for you. Here in America, we call it guardianship. Guardianship is just the continuation of what was begun in Justinian. Now, I've made you a promise, I'm going to keep it. There's nothing wrong with guardianship when it's appropriate. When people truly cannot make decisions, guardianship can be a very, very good thing. As I say frequently, my godson is under guardianship, and thank God for it. So when guardianship is appropriate, good things can happen. But here's the problem. Even though the vast majority of states, including Nebraska, as the one gentleman said, have a preference for limited guardianship, here's what we know from studies. The vast majority of guardianships take away all rights, whether or not a person needs to lose those rights, whether or not a person wants to lose those rights. And that was over 90% of guardianship studied. So whether or not a person needs to lose them, you have a very high likelihood of losing all your rights when you go into guardianship. In fact, as one scholar said, as long as plenary or full guardianship is an option, courts are going to prefer to use it. As judges have told me, it's just easier to check all the boxes than to figure out which boxes to check. That doesn't mean that guardianship is bad or evil, but it means that it can be dangerous. Because as the National Academy of Elder Lawyers said, guardians have substantial and almost complete authority over the lives of vulnerable people. As the AARP said, guardians have the power to make the most basic health and personal and financial decisions for people. Now, if someone needs someone to make those decisions, that's good. But if someone doesn't, imagine if you lost those rights. Imagine if someone says you are limited, therefore you cannot do anything, therefore you must lose the right to do everything. Because just like we know that self-determination is a very, very good thing, and that self-determination, making more choices, leads to a better life, we know the converse is true. That when you lose self-determination, your life gets worse. We've known since the 70s that people who lose self-determination can feel helpless, hopeless, and self-critical. And that's hardly rocket science, is it? If I told you, you cannot do this, you will not do this, you should not do this, I will not allow you to do this, are you feeling particularly motivated to try doing it? Of course not. There's even a name for that called learned helplessness, where people who lose the right to do one thing blame themselves for it and don't want to try other things for fear of, quote unquote, failing at those. More recent studies have documented people with lower self-esteem being more passive and being less able to function when they lose their rights. So what I tell people, what I'm going to tell you right now, is guardianship is neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It is a tool. And when we use a tool correctly, in the right way at the right time, people get helped. When we use it incorrectly, when it is, to quote Brad, overbroad and undo, people can get hurt and things can get broken. And that's the message we have today. And that is not a new message. Congress has known about this. Legislators have known about this for decades. There's a quote up on your screen from 1989, when the House Committee on Aging, chaired by Claude Pepper from Florida, did a long study of guardianships, long before the one that Brad talked about. They talked to guardians, looked at guardianship laws, looked at the impact of guardians. And what you're looking at on your screen is essentially one of the first paragraphs of their findings. Look at the bold words. The typical ward, person under guardianship, has fewer rights than the typical convicted felon. When a person is in a guardian, a third party, often a stranger, has the right to choose where they live, what they do, who they see, what kind of medical care they get, and sometimes when they die. As the congressman said in one short sentence, it is the most punitive civil penalty that can be levied against an American citizen. The rest of that sentence is short of the death penalty. And here's a great example of that. The New York Times covered a case involving a couple named Dino and Lillian. They're on your screen right now. In the story, we learn that Dino was a big band leader during World War II, and Lillian would come in and dance at his club. He was taken with her elegant tango, he said. And the two courted, Dino's words, fell in love, got married. And Dino and Lillian did everything right. They loved each other, they supported each other, they got powers of attorney for each other, saying that if one of us becomes incapacitated, the other should have the power to make decisions. Because in Dino's words, who better? Who better to speak for my wife than the person who loves her and knows her the best? And everything worked great until Lillian began suffering from dementia, advanced dementia. So together, they found the best possible care facility for her when Dino was no longer able to care for her. And Dino would visit her every day, singing her favorite songs and bringing her favorite foods. Everything was great. Until one day when Dino asked a question about the bill and complained that a staff member had dropped her. Dino came home to find a petition for guardianship at his door, asking for a stranger, a third party, an attorney, to be appointed Lillian's plenary guardian, meaning that person would have all decision-making authority over Lillian. And when interviewed, the nursing home's attorney said, and I quote on your screen, "Guardianship is a legitimate means to get the nursing home paid." The New York Times then did a snap survey of guardianship petitions in New York and found that 10% were filed by nursing homes. Does that mean all of them were trying to get paid? No. But does it mean that there are more Lillians out there? Absolutely. And that's what I mean about guardianship potentially being a dangerous thing. Because Dino was already there. He was already there to make decisions, but that was taken away from him because he had the nerve to question a bill. When guardianship is right, it can help. When it is wrong, people can get hurt. So that's the message I have for you, because I'm never going to tell you that guardianship is never needed. Of course it can be appropriate. If a person is so disabled, so incapacitated, they cannot give consent, for example, to medical care, guardianship is an excellent option. If a person does not want to or intentionally neglects his or her care and will not re-engage, guardianship is an excellent option. If there is an emergency and no one available to help, a temporary guardianship is a great solution. So I'm not here to say that guardianship is always wrong. What I am here to say is guardianship is always wrong if we're doing it, quote unquote, because you're this many years old, because you have that condition, because you need help. And the two at the bottom that always turn my stomach, because that's the way it's always been, number one, and because it's for your own good, number two. I hear that last one across the country. I lecture across the country on this issue. And I hear time after time, if I do not get a guardianship for my mother, my father, my loved one, something bad's going to happen. It's for their own good. I always ask people to look in the mirror on that one. And I'd like you to do the same. I know we're not in the same place at the same time, but bear with me. Can I get a show of hands? I can see you. Who here has ever heard the phrase, relax, it's for your own good? Hands. And then who here has ever had something good happen after hearing that phrase? Isn't that about when you think you're about to get a shot? Relax, it's for your own good. I'm trying to run out the door at that point. But that is what we say to people over and over and over again, in the face of 40 years of studies saying it quite possibly could be the opposite of for their own good. And on your screen right now is a quote from the US Supreme Court. It's almost 100 years old and it is right today as it was then. Because here's something I've learned. The vast majority of people seeking guardianship mean well. They are loved ones. They want to protect someone they care about. They want to help someone they care about. They have been advised to do this. They think there is no other options. They mean well. Like the Supreme Court said, when we mean the most well is when we have to be the most careful. When we mean the most well, when we act with the best of intentions, but without considering the consequences or studying the consequences, very, very bad things can happen. The greatest dangers to liberty lurk in the insidious encroachment by people of zeal who are well-meaning but do not understand the consequences. That is as right today as it was then. We have to be careful. Guardianship may be a very good thing, but we should never rush into it without considering something else, because when it is used incorrectly, very, very bad things can happen. And here's how I know this. The estimated number of adults under guardianship has tripled since 1995. And another question to ask yourself, don't we have more ways to make more people more independent than ever now? Don't we have more supports and services since 1995? Don't we have more technology? I mean, consider the phones that you're carrying in your pocket. Consider the phones that I hope you're not looking at now because you're bored, but consider what your phones can do for you. Think about this. You spend so much more time on this phone doing things other than talking on it. With my phone, I can make appointments. I can have a telemedicine appointment. And if I so choose, I can conference someone in to help me understand the doctor, make sure I understand what's going on. With my phone, I can check my bank balance, I can balance my checking account, and if I want, I can give someone else access to make sure that I'm doing the right thing, I'm not overspending. With my phone, I can make and refill prescriptions. With my phone, I can set reminders to take my medication. I know a young woman who I've worked with who has a traumatic brain injury and diabetes. And because of the TBI, she sometimes forgets to take care of her glucose. And she's had a couple of emergencies. And she is exactly the type of person who in 1995 we would assume could not take care of herself. But in 2023, you know what she has? She has a free app. Connects her blood monitor to her phone. So if her sugar level drops, it sends her a text. Eat something. If it drops further, it texts her mother, her sister, and her doctor so they can help her. And just like that, for free, she's able to take care of herself. With that help, she's able to live and work independently. So we have more ways to make more people more independent than ever. We have Centers for Independent Living. We have adult area agencies on aging. We have Medicaid waivers. We have supports. We have additional services through Medicaid like personal care attendants. So why are more and more of us losing our rights than when we didn't have that ability?
And statistics tell us when you go into guardianship, you lose all of your rights. The science is scary. We know that when people are under, in Brad's words, overbroad and undue guardianship, it can have a significant negative impact on their lives, on their physical and mental health. They can live less long even. They do function less well. They feel less well. On the other hand, here's something that we know. When older adults have more self-determination, when they are empowered to make more choices, their lives get better. On your screen are 3 very specific studies on that exact issue. Older adults with more self-determination have improved psychological health, including better adjustment to increased care needs. How important is that? As we decline, whatever power we keep in our lives helps us adjust to that decline. Older adults with more self-determination were found to have a better quality of life. And here's a great one. Support to people with dementia helped them understand and provide informed consent to treatment. Why? Because they were empowered. They were given the opportunity to exercise control over their lives. And as 40 years of studies have found, that is the key to a better life and better opportunities. And here's one of my favorite studies. It is specifically about people with disabilities, but I think it's equally applicable to older adults. Because the number one reason I hear for guardianship is safety. And I never question someone who wants their loved one to be safe. Safety is the number one obligation of every parent and every family member. I have 2 13-year-olds in my life, and I would do anything for them to keep them safe. So I never question someone when they're looking for safety, but I do talk about science. Because there was a study, or a series of studies done by a professor named Dr. Kempka out of Long Island University. On your screen is one of them. And Dr. Kempka realized that people who are the most likely to be abused are women with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's pretty awful. They are exponentially more likely to be physically, sexually, emotionally abused. So Dr. Kempka worked with a group of women with intellectual and developmental disabilities who were of similar abilities and limitations, meaning as a non-scientist, I would call it an apples to apples study. And what she did was she divided them up into 2 groups, a classic study. And what she did to the first group, she called them a control group. She said, go live your lives. Just go live. To the second group, an experimental group, she gave access to a curriculum designed to enhance their self-determination, teach them about decision-making, teach them about opportunities to make decisions. When the curriculum was done, she brought them back together and gave them a test, a recognized test designed to test their ability to recognize and avoid abuse. And guess what she found? Those with more self-determination were far, far better. Remember, apples to apples, same abilities and limitations, were far better at recognizing potentially abusive situations and avoiding them. And I say to you again, that's not rocket science. If I tell you and you know it's your body, your life, your money, your choice, your stuff, won't you fight like hell if someone tries to take it away? Of course you would. So providing people who are greatest at risk for losing their right to make choices with support to make those choices leads to a better life and greater safety. So what I say to you is this, what I hope you can agree with me is this. Our goal, if we want to support older adults, if we want to help older adults live their best, safest, and healthiest life, our goal should be to maximize their self-determination, to do what we can to give them the best opportunity to make the most choices, have the most control over their lives. But there's one thing we have to agree on. We can't just say that self-determination is via con Dios, you're on your own. Go be self-determined, because that's not self-determination, that's abandonment. We have to realize that older adults often need help. I mean, God knows the help I needed just to get onto this site. I need help every day. In fact, we all need help every day, but older adults sometimes need more help than others. So what I say to you is this, what I can hope we can agree to is this. If we want to maximize quality of life of older adults, we need to do 2 things. We need to do everything we can to maximize their self-determination. And we also have to make sure that they have access to the help they need to exercise that self-determination as effectively and safely as possible. And if you agree with that, we can move forward. I can talk to you about supported decision-making. I know I'm 23 slides in and just getting to the point. But supported decision-making, what is it? Is the definition on your screen. If you want, you can screenshot this, you can take this home. This is the definition you will find in textbooks. Supported decision-making is a recognized alternative to guardianship through which older adults and people with disabilities Use friends, family members, and professionals to help them understand the situations and choices they face so they may make their own decisions without the need for a guardian. That is a fine definition of supported decision-making. I know because I wrote it. You can cite me on it. You can say you heard from the guy who wrote this. But you know what I'd rather have you do? I'd rather have you forget this because I think this definition is crap. I think this is pseudo-intellectual, self-indulgent crap that I wrote pushing 9 years ago. I'd like you not to think about it this way. Because if you really ask me what supported decision-making is, I'm going to ask you a question. How do you make decisions? What do you do when you don't know what to do? When you go to the doctor and the doctor speaks medical jargon at you, what do? If you're like me, you say, would you please explain that to me in plain language? What do you do when it's tax time and you have no idea, like me, how to even figure out what goes into what column? If you're like me, you get TurboTax, you go to an accountant. What do you do when the auto mechanic tells you that your muffler bearings are rattling around or your headlight fluid is leaking? If you're like me, you go to a friend and ask if I'm getting ripped off, and your friend says something like, hey, dummy, there's no such thing as headlight fluid. No such thing as muffler bearings. You are totally getting ripped off. In other words, when you do that, when you get that advice, when you seek that help, when you do what we do every day, you're using supported decision-making because that is what supported decision-making is. It is nothing more and nothing less than getting the help you need to do the things you need to do. And we all use supported decision-making every day. People without disabilities use supported decision-making every day. We just don't call it that. You want proof? Think about all of the cliches we have about decision-making. Don't go off half-cocked. Don't make a snap decision. Get a second opinion. Make an informed choice. All these things mean the same thing. Get the help you need to make the best decision. We just don't use the buzzword. We call it life. And think about all of the times in your life you use supported decision-making. On the job, you talk with your colleagues about what to do in a particular situation. In fact, many of us are evaluated based on how well we interact with our colleagues, how we use supported decision-making. In our lives, we talk to our friends. Have you ever woken up and said, I'm not feeling good about this or that, or I'm too close to this, or I have a relationship issue that I just shouldn't be the only decision maker on. You call a friend and you ask for help. You're asking using supported decision-making. And that's something that we do every day. And that's the message I want you to take away from this, is the things that Brad and I are preaching to you are things that we all do. And older adults can do them just like we all do them. Because there is no one way to use supported decision-making. You already know that because you make decisions differently than me. Think about the ways that you use supported decision-making, what you use it for. You can use it to cut through the noise and like figure out what your true options are, to see the forest for the trees. You can use it to focus your attention on the things that are really important, to weigh your options, to make a pro and con list, to make sure that you're making a decision based upon objectivity rather than impulsiveness. All those are all things we go to our supporters for. When my children were born, I wanted very badly to buy a 2-seater convertible. I guess it was just a reaction to feeling like I was getting older. And my buddy said, hey, dummy, 2 kids, 2 seats. And I said, they can fight over it. The one that loves me more can sit in the other seat. And he said, no, think. Are you doing this because you're reacting because you're feeling old? Or are you doing it because you really want to drive your kids around? And sure enough, well, I bought the car, but I also got a different one too, so we could drive the kids around. The point being that all of us go to our friends, all of us go to our supporters, all of us go to the people in our lives to use supported decision-making, to get advice, to get information, to help us do the things that we need to do every day. And like I said, there's no one way to do it because you do it differently than me. Some people just need a listening ear, someone to talk to, someone to bounce ideas off of. Some people, like me, have what I call go-to people. People who can help me at specific times with specific things. And the one gentleman who mentioned a power of attorney, this is a perfect time to write that into a power of attorney. On financial matters, I will work with X, who will help me do this in this way at these times. That can be a limited power of attorney. And if we want it to spring, if I lose capacity, we could then say, if I am found by 2 doctors to not have the capacity to make decisions, X will have authority to make decisions in this area, but he must consult with me first. In other words, we can write supported decision-making into a power of attorney, both before and after it has sprung. Some people like even more formal setups. These have been piloted in Nebraska. They're called micro boards or circles of support. Consider a personal or individual board of directors, a group of people I can meet with regularly to talk about my life, to bounce ideas off of back and forth. And the whole idea is I get a diverse set of viewpoints. There might even be arguments, but in the end, I get the information I need. Well, all of these are supported decision-making because all of them involve me going to you for information that I need to make the best decisions in my life, with me being the ultimate decision maker. In fact, I always say that there's three things that supported decision making is about. And if we can agree to these three things, and spoiler alert, they are all easy. If we can agree to these three things, we can leave here advocates for SDM. Let's start. Number one, we all agree that everyone has the right to make choices to the maximum of their abilities. And that's easy because that is the Declaration of Independence. We hold that truth to be self-evident. We hold that truth to be self-evident because we are all endowed by our Creator with the inalienable rights to choose our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's number one. Number two is even easier, is I can say to you, I can say to Brad, I don't understand something. Can you help me figure this out so I can make the best decision? Without Brad then saying, well, that must mean you can't make any decisions, so you should lose your rights. That's easy because we do that every day. Every day we get advice. And the third one's easiest still. There are as many ways to give and get help as there are people. You ever have to go to plan B for something? Plan C, plan D, plan triple F? Of course you do. The fact that one thing you tried didn't work is not evidence that nothing will work. There's always another tool in the box. Something may work. Nothing may work. If nothing works, guardianship is probably appropriate. But what's the rush? The rights that we talked about that are so precious, that are so endemic to you and I, should not be taken away easily. And one of the reasons that's true is we know from research that supported decision-making can help people. We know from emerging research that people who use supported decision-making to make their own decisions instead of having others make decisions for them have more self-determination, which again, I say at the risk of being redundant, is hardly rocket science. If I am working with you to make more of my own decisions instead of you making those decisions for me, I have more control over my life. If I have more control over my life, I have self-determination. 40 years of study says that leads to a better quality of life. And there are ways we can do this. We can write this into the things that we use every day. And again, the person who asked the incredibly prescient question about powers of attorney, here's how we can do it. We can write a power of attorney that says, if I'm incapacitated, I want you to make decisions for me. Sure. But we can also write one that says, if I'm not incapacitated, I want you to help me. I authorize you to come to me with my healthcare provider, to help my doctor understand me and me understand my doctor, so that I will have the best possible understanding and be able to make my own decisions. So that when the doctor says I can't have a third person in the room for privacy laws, I can say, here's my power of attorney that gives that person authorization to be there. And we can include language that says, should I become incapacitated? Of course, that person becomes my decision maker, but we can also write how those decisions will be made. We can do it in finances too. We can say, as a person gets older, as a person begins to lose the ability to manage finances, what we can do is put them on a budget. In this days of prepaid debit cards, that's pretty easy. We can say to a person, you have a budget of this many dollars per week. Anything you want to spend over that, I have to co-sign off it. I have to be okay with it. I have to agree to it. But we can use supported decision-making. Look at the bold words at the bottom of the screen. Before I say that you may not spend that money, we have to have a discussion. We have to discuss it. You have to tell me why you want to do that. And I have to give primary consideration to those wishes before I say yes or no, because that's a conversation. And maybe I can help that person understand why it's not a good idea to do those things. Or maybe I can help that person make a plan for how they can do those things. So self-determination is retained, but safety is also promoted. And that's one of the last things I want to say to you. If you're thinking to yourself, sure, it sounds good, but can you guarantee me this will lead to safety? The answer is no, I cannot. I cannot promise you that supported decision-making or self-determination will guarantee that a person will not be taken advantage of. In fact, I can guarantee you right now that someone out there, with or without disabilities, young or old, is in fact being taken advantage of by someone they trust. But I want you to think about the alternative. There has never, not once, been a study that found that people are inherently safer under guardianship. And in fact, as I showed you from Dr. Kemke's studies, there are some work showing that people are safer when they have more self-determination. So what I say is, before we jump to removing rights, except in emergency situations, shouldn't we try to empower first? Because if we know that self-determination is correlated with increased safety, shouldn't that be the one that we try first before removing rights? And in just the last 10 years, this is exactly what's happening. 10 years ago, as of 2 weeks ago, I had the great honor to represent a young woman named Jenny Hatch in the first case, the first trial, to hold that a person had the right to use supported decision-making instead of being in a guardianship. And just in 10 years, 26 states and the District of Columbia have passed laws recognizing or empowering the use of supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship. There is the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making. I'm one of the project directors of it, supporteddecisionmaking.org. There are projects in every state, including this one. And like Brad tells you, you can find out about what we're doing and get some resources from the link on your screen. It is a movement that has gained traction with every passing day. And in fact, that 26 number is outdated because Alabama passed their law just this summer. So the majority of states now do what none of them did 10 years ago. Who's going to be the next one? Who is going to be the Nebraskan who becomes the older adult, who protects his or her rights, who regains his or her rights because they use support? Who will be the Nebraskan who sets the model for this state? And who will be the Nebraskans who argue that there is a better way, that there is a way forward, following the path that was forged by so many others? It's been my honor to talk to you today. I am thrilled to have been here. I'm honored to have been here. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Jonathan, thank you. And we're going to open it up to the people in studio as well as people online to see if maybe you have a question or questions. By the way, wonderful presentation, especially via Zoom. We're very appreciative. And
Thank you so much. My cat is very excited to have heard all that.
We'll give your cat our best.
I thought he was going to make an appearance, but perhaps soon.
Questions? We do have a question, please.
This is a personal interest one. Was there something that happened to you on early, Jonathan, that made you so passionate about this particular issue?
Yes. It's very funny. I'm told I make everything about me. I'm a little uncomfortable doing that now. But what I can tell you is this: my uncle Robert, Uncle Bob, was born in the 1950s, early 50s, and had cerebral palsy. And the story I was told, and I'm a little hesitant here because I only just heard the whole story really pretty recently from my mom, was that when he was born and it was clear that he had CP, nurses came to my grandfather and said, he is never going to walk and he is never going to talk. And we can leave him by the window and nature will take its course. So my grandfather runs and gets a pediatrician who takes care of Uncle Bob. But at one point, the pediatrician says, it's okay. He's going to be fine. You never need to worry about him. In fact, you never need to see him. There are places for people like him where he'll be well taken care of until nature takes its course. So my grandfather puts an addition on his house and puts a ramp up in the 50s, mind you, when no one had seen a ramp before. So I was raised in the 80s and 90s with Uncle Bob there. My grandfather fought for him to get an education at a time when people with disabilities were excluded from schools. So Uncle Bob could spell. He couldn't speak yet. He could point to a letterboard and tell jokes. He was a funny guy. And there he was, doing things. I would go to a Harlem Globetrotters game in Madison Square Garden. I'd be up in the nosebleeds. Uncle Bob would be in the floor seats. His hair never went gray. Women loved him. I was very jealous from a very young age. But here's the thing. When I went to law school and as I got older, I saw that whereas my Uncle Robert in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s had a place at the table, literally and metaphorically, older adults and people with disabilities didn't and still don't. We still live in a world where older adults and people with disabilities aren't welcome. or that because we mean well, we hold them back, we assume. And to be very honest, you paid me the courtesy of calling me passionate. I would just say it pissed me off. Because that's just wrong. That, to me, that's bullying. Even in the best of intentions, it's bullying. So I have been incredibly blessed that I can spend my career advocating for what my grandfather did 70 years ago, in the hopes that people will come to realize what he did, is that there is a space at the table and in the world for people. And I'm so sorry to have sermonized, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to say it.
Any other, we have another question, please.
What would you say would be the first step to getting this passed in Nebraska as the norm versus guardianship?
The first step is if you think that what Brad and I say made sense, tell two people. Encourage people to do it. Brad mentioned ambassadors. Ambassadors are important, people who have been empowered. Here's what I've found is that when people see others living a good life, they want that life. So talk about it, work on it. I'm less worried about law than I am with culture. If we change the law in Nebraska, it's not necessarily fixing the problem. If laws fix the problem, nobody would speed and we would have cured racial discrimination in 1964. Neither of these things are true. So we need less a change in law, although I love changes in law. We need changes in culture. And until we do that, until people recognize that 1,500 years since Justinian is enough to make assumptions, then all the laws in the world won't matter. So it's talking and it's educating and it is advocating. And all of you can be advocates. All of you can leave here today to say, why don't we think about something different? Doesn't mean we should never think about guardianship. Again, guardianship can be a good thing, but we should consider other things as well. There's an entire spectrum of opportunities. We should look at all of them.
Can a supportive decision-making model work with an existing guardianship because of dementia?
Sure. And here's my take: is SDM is not a binary choice. In fact, I advocate for supported decision-making in guardianship. And most state laws, and I believe Nebraska, say the guardian should empower the person to make as many decisions as possible to regain or gain competence. So a person with dementia who is, I agree, losing capability can still be empowered to make as many decisions as he or she can. So the model can work. It doesn't mean that there may be an end to the guardianship, because a person may decline to the point where they can't get out of guardianship, but they can be empowered to make as many decisions as possible with support. And what we know is more self-determination equals better quality of life. So I don't look at this as a binary choice. I look at it as self-determination is a good thing. And I think 40 years of studies back that. So whether you're in a guardianship or not, we should be incorporating that. Now, if you're in a guardianship and we find that a person can make decisions, then one of the best things in the world is to go back to the judge and say, good news, judge, I did my job, fire me. I've seen judges end guardianships, and judges are not always the most happy people in the world, but I've seen judges the happiest: adoptions, marriages, citizenship ceremonies, and ending guardianships. Because in all of those, they've essentially created a family or a citizen. So if it works and a person no longer needs a guardian, great. But if a person does need a guardian, we can make their lives better within that guardianship.
Before we go to break.
This individual is asking, is there access to a supportive decision-making agreement document?
Sure, lots of forms out there. A great place to start, supporteddecisionmaking.org. They've got several models. I think Google is also your friend. Several states use forms. My take, one thing I want to stress, though, is I don't think that supported decision-making should be wholly dependent upon a form. You and I use it every day. I think forms are good. I think agreements are good. I'm a lawyer. Of course, I believe in that. But we shouldn't overlook the fact that many people use SDM informally. And if a person, Jenny Hatch, who I mentioned, again, who I call the patron saint of supported decision-making, doesn't have a supported decision-making agreement, doesn't want one, wants to live her life like everyone else does. So when I have testified before legislators that are considering laws that require a form, my general statement is this: I don't have a form for my supported decision-making. Jenny Hatch doesn't want a form. And if your law would result in the patron saint of supported decision-making being in guardianship, we should reconsider it. That said, forms are good. They're helpful. I like stuff. I like to give the doctor stuff so the doctor doesn't question me. So you can find them, but I just beg you, do not equate supported decision-making with a piece of paper.
Well, Jonathan, Brad, thank you so much. Let's give it up for them. Excuse me for just a moment. There was one person that sent in an email, and we'll make sure to get back to that person. We need to take a break because we have another speaker joining us shortly, and I know after lunch you kind of get a little fatigued, so go move around, and we will be back starting at 3 o'clock with Attorney General Hilgers. Thank you.